Hi, my name is MK Williams and I'm a published author, and today I'm bringing you the final video in my podcast series where I'm going to give you my favorite podcasts that I love to listen to. So first I'm going to go over my favorite bookish podcasts, and then I'll go over some non-specifically book-related ones that I think would be a real benefit to you as an authorpreneur, as the saying goes now. So my number one most recommended podcast to listen to is What Should I Be Reading Next with Anne Bogel, which, unless you are living under a rock but still somehow watching this video, you've heard of her podcast because it's amazing and it's everywhere, and Anne is doing all the things for the bookish community that you would hope somebody would be doing with her stature. I love this podcast because my TBR has exploded since I started to listen to it, and it's really helped me to find books that I want to read doing research for the book that I'm writing, and also just some fun different books to try out. I always feel happy when I finish listening to the podcast. Like, I just am in a good mood, which is always just a great feeling to have. Like, you can tell the host, Anne, is really connecting with the audience, or at least I feel that way. So if you want to hang out, Anne, let me know. But I just really enjoy it. And I know specifically there was an episode that talked about doing Enneagram typing for characters, and I was just in nerd heaven. That was great. So you should check out her podcast. The next one is The Reading Women with Autumn and Kendra, and I just love it. It's so fun. The two hosts have a really good back and forth, which I really appreciate, and it's just so fun to listen to. I love their mission of trying to promote female authors and female-driven narratives, which is really great. And I also really appreciate when they talk about the structure of a book and the bones of it, because as a writer, I put a lot of thought into that, so it's nice to see that somebody appreciates that when they're reading it and they're looking out for it, so really appreciate that one. The next one I would recommend is Book Riot. So this is kind of, in my opinion, this is like the nightly news for if you're in the publishing or book industry. You need to know what Book Riot's talking about, because their main podcast talks about specifically just book news, publishing news, trade news, and because I want to be a player in the publishing space, I listen to it. Even though they usually only focus on traditional publishing, the few times they've mentioned self-publishing, it's always been the more negative news, never like the positive news, but it is what it is, and I do think it's important, to say I want to be a publisher, even if I'm only publishing myself. I need to know what's going on in the space. I have liked their Read or Dead thriller podcast, which I think is just really fun because I love thrillers and mysteries. I've tried some of the other ones and haven't loved them. Like, I think Annotated, I was like, eh. But Book Riot, the main Book Riot podcast, and Read or Dead are great. So those are my two recommendations from that group, conglomerate of podcasts. The next one is The Creative Penn. So again, unless you're living under a rock, you probably know about Joanna Penn and her amazing content, but if you don't know, you're learning about it. So she does an amazing weekly podcast. I think she said she was going to switch it up to be bi-weekly, so depending on when this video goes live, she might have already switched, but it's at least an hour once a week, and it goes really in depth on these niche topics within self-publishing. She talks a lot about going wide, not just being with Amazon, and other specific things related to the business and the craft of writing. So I really appreciate that. Same feeling I have with What Should I Read Next. Like, I feel so connected to her when I'm listening to the podcast and to her and her guests that she interviews. So I think it's really great. And Joanna, if you want to hang out, just let me know. I think you're awesome. I feel like I'm friends with the podcast host that I listen to every week because I hear them every week, but they just don't know who I am. But she's great. So you should listen to The Creative Penn with Joanna Penn. The next one that I really like is called Go Publish Yourself by IngramSpark, and I think it just gets a A+ just because of the name. It's just great. But they also do a really great job of focusing on, again, the industry news, industry tactics. So again, as a publisher, even though I'm only publishing myself, I do appreciate that I'm learning about the industry and things that I need to be doing within the industry to be successful. So I found Go Publish Yourself to be very successful. The next final bookish podcast I'll recommend is the Book Marketing Podcast with Dave Chesan, because he's the OG in terms of Kindle tips, Kindle hacking, if you will, Kindle optimization, and he's obviously expanded beyond just talking about Kindle with his Kindlepreneur brand, but I really appreciate that these are small, short podcasts I can listen to get an idea, and then I can always go to his website on his blog to learn more in depth about a topic, but I think he does a great job bringing on different authors and really highlighting different subgenres and different tactics, and just going deep on some of them, but also then giving a good overview. So he has a really good blend, so I'd highly recommend that podcast. I'm almost caught up on the entire backlist, so it's really good. And then the two non-bookish podcasts that I'll recommend for aspiring authors or authorpreneurs is Side Hustle Show with Nick Loper as part of Side Hustle Nation. So this is super fun. He himself is a self-published author, which I think is great, so he understands the struggle in the author life. But he also interviews people who do a wide array of side hustles, from the whole Amazon spectrum of side hustles you can do, from just one-off things, which is really great. So even if I'm listening to one that's about starting a lawn service, which I have no aspiration to do, I can still learn some marketing techniques, some business techniques, and I always just find it very inspirational to hear from other people who are kind of living the same life. I'm not a full-time writer yet, but I do hope to make it that full-time career one day. So it's really great to hear from other people who are on the same path, and it's very inspirational. And the final podcast I will recommend today for authorpreneurs is Women of Impact with Lisa Bilyeu. So I found this podcast through the Impact Theory podcast with Tom Bilyeu, who is her husband. And I always really enjoyed listening to his, and his wife was on a few of their side episodes, and I just found her to be so inspirational. So I followed her on social media, and then she was doing a podcast called Women of Impact, and it was all about these really inspirational women who, built their own business, built their own brand, built their identity, overcame these obstacles, and it was just so inspiring. If you are ever having a day where you are doubting yourself as an author, an entrepreneur, just look at her social media for 2 seconds and you will be inspired and you will get your butt in gear to go make it happen. So I just find it so great. And what I really love is how well she connects with the audience, not just when I'm listening to the podcast, but also if I go on social media and she has a post up on Instagram and I comment on it, she will actually comment back, which is amazing because she has thousands and thousands and thousands of followers. So she's made a really good personal connection, and because of that, I will recommend her to you. So I hope that you have enjoyed this entire series on podcasts. I hope it's helped you to learn more about how to get on a podcast to help promote your book, how to prepare, how to make the most of it, and hopefully given you some ideas for podcasts that you can listen to. There's more that I've been on that I haven't specifically named in this video, but I have had all their links in the entire series, so you should check all of those out because they were gracious enough to have me on their episodes, so hopefully you can look into them as well. I hope you found this helpful. If you have, please click like or subscribe, and now you can get back to writing your book.